It wasn't cold that night, and yet, inside the bunker, my body stayed tense, as if it could not find a position to rest. The walls were sweating with dampness, and silence lay everywhere. A heavy silence, not a peaceful one. The kind that feels like it is waiting. I had not come for this. When I volunteered, there was only one road in my mind, the Pindu's front. That was where my brothers were fighting. That was where our men were falling. That was where history was being written. I did not ask for privilege. I asked only to stand beside them. Instead, they sent me here, to Rupel, a fortress buried into the mountain, tunnel upon tunnel, steel, stone, and waiting. You will hold the position, they told us. You will wait. And we waited. Every day news reached us from the front, battles, dead men, names that never had the time to become stories. And here we were, alive, idle, hidden away. Not out of fear. We had orders. The heaviest thing was not the silence. It was the ache of knowing that others were fighting and dying for the homeland, while we simply stood and waited. And yet, that night, something had begun to change in the air, as if the moment was drawing near for us to learn why we were here. They told us that what we were guarding could not be seen on any map. It was not a river, nor a mountain, nor a border drawn in pencil. It was a line made of stone, concrete, and men. They called it the Metaxas line. To others, it was a plan. To us, it was everyday life. Fortifications dug deep into the earth, hidden inside the mountain, linked by tunnels so narrow a man had to pass through with his head bowed. These aren't for glory, the sergeant used to say. They're burrows meant to hold. And that word, hold, I felt it like a weight on my shoulders. In the Pindus, they said, the fighting was out in the open. Men could be seen, advancing, falling. There, courage had a face. Here, we were guarding a northern passage, a quiet front. We stood in a narrow gorge between mountains that seemed to squeeze the river like a clenched fist. If they broke through here, the road to the heart of the country would lie open. And yet, nothing moved. Day came and went. Sentry duty, drills, reports. And inside me, a thought I never dared to speak aloud. What if the war ended, without us ever having to fight? I was not the only one carrying that ache. You could see it on our faces in the way we kept silent more than we spoke. At Rupel, there were not many words, only short phrases, clipped, as if we feared that something heavier than we could bear might slip out. Mitsos, the one closest to my age, always kept a letter folded inside his greatcoat. He never opened it in front of us. He only touched it with his fingers, like a talisman. His brother was in Albania as well. Every time a messenger arrived, Mitsos was the first to stand, and then he would sit back down, more slowly. The sergeant never spoke of his past. We only knew that he had already seen war. When someone complained, rarely, he did not grow angry. He only said, "It will come here too. War forgets no one." At night in the tunnels, we spoke in low voices sluggishly about things that did not matter. Fields, weddings that had been delayed, mothers who were waiting. No one said he felt useless. There was no need. We all knew. It was not fear that gnawed at us. It was the thought that we might never be given the chance to prove why we were here. And so, we waited. Dawn was breaking when we heard the first sound. It was unlike anything we were used to. It was not a drill. It was not a movement. It was a deep, heavy hum coming from above, drawing closer. Someone shouted something. I don't remember what. I only remember my stomach tightening and my legs growing heavy, as if my body knew before my mind did. Then came the explosions. The fortress shuddered like a living thing. Dust fell from the ceiling. The lamps flickered. Somewhere deeper inside, metal shrieked against metal. No one ran. Each man went to his position, mechanically, as if we had been doing it for years. "To your posts!" the sergeant's voice rang out, calm. That frightened me more than the noise. The hours passed without my noticing. Fire. Pause. Fire again. The air reeked of smoke and dampness. My ears rang. Every time a shell burst nearby, I waited for the end. And yet, the fortress held, and we held. At some point, between two explosions, the thought came to me. Not with joy, not with fear, with relief. At last, I told myself, we are no longer waiting. We were not spectators. We were not behind the war. The war had come to us. And there, amid the noise and the smoke, I understood something no one had ever taught me. Courage does not exist only in moving forward. It also exists in standing fast and not leaving. Night fell without us noticing. Everything inside us had grown heavy. The explosions had stopped, yet my ears were still ringing, as if they refused to believe it was over, even for a while. We sat on the floor of the tunnel, our backs against the wall. No one spoke. There was nothing to say that would fit into words. I took off my helmet and felt my head throbbing. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from something deeper, quieter. A wounded man was groaning a short distance away. He wasn't shouting. That was the worst part. I held him while they bound his leg. The blood was warm, sticky on my fingers. It was nothing like the stories I had carried in my mind when I enlisted. Someone lit a cigarette. For a moment, the light caught the faces around me. Tired, pale, not heroic. Real. I thought of my brothers. I wondered whether, at that very moment, they too were sitting somewhere in the mountains of Pindus, in a corner, backs against a wall, trying to understand what had happened to them. That was when I understood. War was not what I had imagined. It was not only glory, nor only shouting. It had silence afterward, and the weight of the day that had passed, and a thought that would not let you sleep. Tomorrow may be worse. Dawn brought no rest. It only brought continuation. Our eyes closed from exhaustion, but our hands worked on their own. No one asked whether we could endure it. There was no need. Rupel had to hold. The line had to hold, and we were the ones who would secure it with our lives. The attacks came again, closer this time. Their sound had changed. It was no longer sudden. It was persistent, as if someone were testing our strength, blow by blow. Somewhere inside the tunnel, a weapon jammed. We realized it too late. For a moment, everyone's breath stopped, not from fear, but from that frozen thought that a single small mistake is enough for everything to end. I did not wait for an order. I bent down, grabbed the metal, my hands filling with grease and dust. The weapon came back to life. The sergeant looked at me. He said nothing. He only nodded. That gesture carried more weight than any praise. We were no longer young men waiting to prove something. We were soldiers, and the role of a soldier is to carry out his duty. At some point between two attacks, we heard that Yugoslavia had fallen. The enemy had bypassed us, and the Allies had withdrawn. Roads had opened elsewhere, and yet no one panicked. Someone said quietly, "We are still here." By the third day, we no longer measured time. We measured it in breaths, in pauses between sounds, in looks that said more than any voice would dare. We were exhausted. Our bodies ached in places I did not know existed. And yet, when the attacks came again, we rose without thought. Not out of stubbornness, out of habit, out of duty. At some point, news reached us, not clearly, in fragments, about the front elsewhere, about decisions that were not in our hands. I understood then that the war was no longer being decided only here, and yet we had to continue, not because we would change the fate of the world, but because this was what had been entrusted to us. I looked around me. The same men who, only days earlier, had shared the same ache as I had. Now, there was no room for it. It had dissolved into exhaustion and responsibility. I thought of my brothers again, not with envy this time, with understanding. Each of us stood where fate, or orders, had placed him, and none of those fronts was smaller than another. When the order came to cease, I did not feel defeated. I felt only that we had done what was asked of us. We were still standing, tired, worn down, but standing. We felt that we had won, and yet, unjustly, we were to surrender. As we came out of the fortress, we marched past the enemy as victors. They presented arms to us in salute, and we felt like victors. And yet we knew that we had handed over Greek land. It was unbearable. Many of us wept. But the thought that we had been left behind was gone forever. We had done our duty. Years later, I stood again at Rupel, not with a weapon this time. The gorge was the same, the mountains unmoving as if not a single day had passed. Yet I was a different man. I looked at the stone, the tunnels, the iron openings that once trembled from the blasts. Then I understood what we truly were, not mere soldiers waiting for war, but guards who held their ground when the time came. I thought again of that first thought, how others fight while we merely sit. Now it felt foreign, unfair. As I turned to leave, I glanced back for a moment. I did not feel pride alone, I felt peace, because at last I knew. I had fought for my homeland,